All right. Hello, everybody. How are you today, Bob?
I'm doing great, Paris. It's snowy outside, but we're in the office and, it's sunny. So, I can't complain. It's really cool because there's entire fields where there's no plowing or anything, and the snow is so thick and so hard, you can just go out and walk on it
It's
and slide
crazy.
across it just like it's an ice rink. It's so
It is
fun.
crazy. I like the cold during like Christmas and New Year, but at this point, I'm kind of ready for spring. I'm kind of over it.
Oh man, you got like another 6 weeks left.
I
Sorry.
know we've got a while. It's okay. Hanging in there.
Yeah, good.
All right, everybody, it is 2:01. Welcome to today's office hour session. If you're new here, my name is Paris Williams. I'm the MC for these bi-weekly sessions. I'm joined here with the owner of Ironside IT Partners, Bob Miller. These sessions are really designed to just give you clear, practical guidance on your cybersecurity and IT. These sessions are designed for you guys, so if you have any questions or anything at any point, feel free to drop them in the Q&A box. Each session, we're going to start with a brief topic, and then we will open the floor for Q&A. So you can submit them in the Q&A box. You also can submit them on our website, and any questions submitted there will be answered during the next session. I will make sure I put the link to that in the chat. I also wanted to mention that these sessions are recorded, so they will be up by the end of the day on YouTube. I'll make sure I put our YouTube channel in the chat as well. Today's topic is an important one. MFA is not enough in what you need to protect your business. So Bob is going to cover the session topic and answer your questions. Bob, I'll hand it over to you.
All right, let me share my screen and then we'll
Perfect.
get started here. So MFA is not enough what you need to protect your business. And one of the reasons why we decided to do this is because of proliferation of MFA bypass attacks across our clients and some prospects too, and what we're seeing out there. So I think it's important to understand a little bit about MFA and why this can happen, and especially since MFA is talked about so much and it is so annoying and frustrating to deal with, why that is still absolutely necessary. And so we'll go through all this, and then we'll go through at the end. We'll talk about what we need to do to protect ourselves from MFA attacks. But first of all, I want to clarify MFA is necessary. What I'm talking about here is not what we do instead of MFA. What we're going to talk about today is a security posture or a mentality about cybersecurity that includes MFA. The key is that MFA is just not sufficient anymore. It really, frankly, never was. But it made it it was a huge step forward when we started rolling out MFA across our clients. And, we saw some significant protections that came into place. But, as all things, when something new happens and to protect you, then you have a little bit of a respite there while you adopt it. But then the bad guys, they catch up pretty quickly and they start figuring ways around it. So here's how MFA works. We'll talk about that first. And then I'm going to back up just a quick second and talk about an incredibly important cybersecurity maxim, and that is layers of proof. And this is how you prove you are who you are. Because the reality is, in order to get to your, say, Microsoft 365 mailbox or your Gmail account, you need to prove that you are who you say you are. And so the three methods of proving you are who you say you are is via something you know. You can think of that as a password. So it's something that only you know, and you set it up when you set up the account. And then as long as you retain access to that password, you're kind of proving you are who you are based on something you know. Of course, we all know the weakness of that is anybody can find out what that password is. Now, it can also be something that you have in your possession. And that's where MFA comes into play because that's a mathematical algorithm that is determined at the time of setup of the MFA setup, where both the user, which would be you, and the service, let's say Microsoft 365, they have a shared secret code, and that code is an algorithm that they can then use to determine what is a predictable code that is generated every 30 seconds. And so the code that you come up with is the same code that the service comes up with. So therefore, it's something that you have. Now, it can also be something that you are. And now I think that probably the easiest way to um, explain what that is would be, say, your fingerprint scanner or Face ID on your iPhone. Or if you remember Star Trek to The Wrath of Khan all the way back in the early 80s, when Captain Kirk went up to authenticate himself to the ship and they did a retinal scan. There's lots of different ways to use something that you are, but that is one of the three layers of proof: something that you know, something that you have, and something that you are. So again, something that you have is where MFA comes into play. So, typical MFA flow. Here's how MFA works. Pretty simply, you enter your username and password, you click sign in, and then it's like, oh, wait, I need something else. I need another factor. That's the F in MFA, multi-factor authentication. It can also be called 2FA or two-factor authentication. We typically try to call it multi-factor authentication because often with certain services, including Microsoft 365, if you choose, you can use a different factor. You can choose multiple different ways of getting that other factor in there. So one of those could be the MFA code, which is the most common way, and that is either like typically with Google Authenticator or Microsoft Authenticator or any number of a variety of third-party authenticator devices, or if you're one of our clients, we give you Iron Glue complimentary, which is a password manager, and you can also store your MFA codes in there so that it presents it and autofills it when you log into websites. So that's the MFA code. It could also be a backup code. And so typically when you set up an account, they give you some backup codes that you can use. They're one-time use codes that you can use to in place of the MFA code to log in the event that you can't get to your Google Authenticator, Microsoft Authenticator, or something like that. Another method is SMS, which is probably the worst way to have two-factor authentication or multi-factor authentication, and that's where you have a text code sent out over the cell phone carrier network directly to your phone, and then you enter that code in to get access. And then probably the most secure of all of them is a hardware key, which is literally something that you have. Like you hold on to it and you plug it into your iPhone to log in or your computer's USB port. And it has keys on that are not located anywhere else. They're only on that hardware key, and you can use that to log in. And that's a very efficient way to do it. Definitely a heavy lift to set up, but it's super, super safe. However, the thing about MFA is it only protects the login event. It only protects authenticating to the service rather. Once you're authenticated, then MFA has no bearing on the security whatsoever. The security is determined by, that's a whole other webinar. Maybe we'll talk about that some other time, but that's determined by the service at play. And MFA is no longer at play here any longer. Now, here's what threat actors do. MFA is frankly too hard to break. It's a great system. I mean, it's a really, really good system. You think about it. You set up an account and let's go back 20 years. Set up an account and you enter your password, right? And you store that password in your password manager or a sticky note on your desk or which I never recommend, but this is 20 years ago we're talking about, right? So if let's say that you do that, now that sticky note is there. How's anybody else going to get that password? But there's a variety of different attacks, but getting that password is still pretty difficult. So what they do to break through that password is they use a lot of different bypass attacks to get around the fact that they don't have your password, or they steal it off the sticky note on your desk, right? So, but MFA is orders of magnitude more difficult than that because this is a mathematical algorithm that's agreed upon between your Google Authenticator or Microsoft Authenticator and the service in question at the time that you set it up. And then it's never discussed again. ever. There's no sticky note on the desktop. There's not, a kid or spouse or coworker or something like that that can get access to that password. It's stored and pretty safely on the Google Authenticator and at the service in question, such as Microsoft 365. So they don't even try to break. The threat actors don't even try to figure out a way to get your MFA code or to break through it. It's just too hard. So they move around it. They try to find other ways to gain access to the service. So right here on the screen, a lot of different ways they can do it. They can trick the users. They can trick them into entering their MFA code for them. And then they've got access to your login now. They can try to hijack your session. That would be an existing session that you've already authenticated to in the past. Now, a threat actor gains access to your system and they hijack the session that you have to your ERP software, Microsoft 365, whatever. They can work to compromise your various devices that you use to log in. And then once they've got access to your device, they've got access to your session. They can do a lot of different things to gain your trust and to mimic that service to get you to give up your login credentials. Now, with the MFA workarounds and vulnerabilities, um, actually, this slide is left over from last time. Sorry about that. Here we go. MFA workarounds and vulnerabilities. We've got MFA fatigue attacks. So let's think about this for a second. Here we've got a scenario where you've got a threat actor who's got your password. They've already got your password. And so now what they're trying to do is they're trying to get you to click accept on your phone's notifications. So that way you allow them to log in. Because with Microsoft Authenticator, with Duo, with a lot of these different authentication solutions, they do send a push notification to your phone. And all you got to do is click OK, or sometimes enter another code that's on their screen. And so what they try to do is they try to get those push notifications sent to your phone, trick you into thinking that, oh, this is from a valid service, this is needed, and then you click, okay, go ahead and get in. So that's one way that they try to bypass MFA. Now, that's been mitigated significantly by Microsoft Authenticator's recent updates in the last couple of years, where you have to enter a code instead of just clicking allow. And Duo recently pushed out some pretty significant upgrades in that way. So that way they can still send a push notification, but now you also need to enter a code there as well. And so now we're dealing with going right back to just entering codes on phones or entering codes on devices instead of having the luxury of a push. But that's the nature of security. It's always constantly evolving. We're always trying to find responses to threat actors attacks, such as this one, the MFA fatigue attacks. Another one is real-time MFA phishing, which I mentioned in the last slide, where they send a phishing email, or maybe not. Maybe it's an ad on a legitimate website, and then it gets clicked on, and it takes you to a login screen for your Microsoft 365 account. A lot of users are just going to go ahead and log in because they think that they need to, because they're programmed. Oh, I have to log into my Microsoft 365 account. They do. And then now they've given away the house, so to speak. Another one is compromised devices. Once a device is compromised and there's already sessions that exist, they can take over those sessions from that compromised device. Think a phone or a workstation, a laptop, or something like that. Another one is SMS MFA. This is pretty significant. Even though the code is just sent over SMS to your phone for you to enter in, SMS is not the most secure method of sending information. Um, it's it can be hijacked. Your number can get ported without your consent. There's a lot. They can threat actors can replicate your SIM card and intercept your SMSs. There's a lot of different types of things that can happen. So even though it's still pretty common out there, particularly unfortunately with banks and other financial institutions, it is finally going away because on a targeted attack, an SMS is just not very secure. And then we have also got legacy protocols and bypass paths, which is basically using older versions, older methods of gaining access to, say, your email account or your ERP software or something like that, that might still be alive and active. So that way, older software can continue to integrate or something along those lines. Uh, they're still active. And so all that a threat actor has to do is find out where they are, where they're active, and then go ahead and log in as them. So unfortunately, that happens a lot. So what do we do about all of these things? We can we have to attack this from a lot of different areas because it's very broad how they can bypass MFA. One of the biggest things is user account protections. And one of the most important user account protections that we can put in place is called conditional access. Now, this is primarily with Microsoft 365, although a lot of different services offer conditional access configurations. Microsoft kind of they pioneered this, let's say. So it's common to be able to do this in Microsoft 365. We can talk about that if you're interested. However, it does require a different Microsoft 365 license level. Just to throw that out there. But conditional access is very powerful because it allows you to restrict access for a user based on location, device, or behavior. So let's say a real simple example would be, let's say that Joe never leaves the state of Pennsylvania, New Jersey, or Delaware. In other words, the greater Philadelphia area. Never leaves those states, never travels anywhere else. So we can say Joe is not permitted to log in anywhere except for those particular geographic areas. And then any other attempt to log in, even if they have the MFA code, even if they have the password, um, it'll just be denied. And so that's a great example. You could also restrict it based on device or certain behaviors once logged in. And so conditional access is a very powerful way of protecting an account. Another thing you can do is restrict legacy authentication. And that's what I was talking about in the prior slide, where with ERP software or Microsoft 365 or any kind of a soft login, SaaS login or anything like that, a lot of times they have legacy authentication methods. And so we can restrict those. If you don't need them turned on, we should turn them off. And if you do need them turned on, let's talk about for how long, and let's talk about what the risk that those may pose to you. Another thing is require modern MFA. So that's where I was talking about different backtalk between the service in question and your phone's authentication. It doesn't necessarily always have to be just entering a six-digit code. It can be push notification where you then have to enter a code into your phone instead of the service. And so that's a more of a modern way to do MFA. We can limit admin privileges. Okay, this is huge actually, because we see so often that threat actors gain access to a user who has administrative rights. And then that user's account can then just, once compromised, they can do whatever they want administratively. Another thing that you can do too is even if you've got good administrative controls, we can make them better by having multiple administrators do unique things. That way, if one of those administrator accounts becomes compromised, it limits the threat actor's ability to do something. They still might be able to do something, but they might not be able to delete all your data or steal all your data. They might only be able to delete users, for example, or add or remove rights to other users, things like that. And then finally, we can do security awareness training, which is pretty crucial and generally required by cybersecurity, liability insurance policies, and regulatory agencies. Anyway, they typically require this. But ongoing security awareness training significantly helps to allow users to identify anomalous types of behavior by threat actors, such as when they click on an ad on a news site or on Etsy or something like that. If they click that ad and then it takes them to their Microsoft 365 login, that's probably not legitimate. So things like that, cybersecurity awareness training can really help. Another thing we can do beyond MFA for endpoint protections. Now, these are the devices on your network. These are laptops, workstations, PCs, kiosks, cell phones, tablets, things like that. We can implement, manage, or extended detection and response. That's where the device's behavior is monitored by security operations centers 24/7 to see what's happening on the device, to see if it's, bad actory, like things like that. Crucially, we can do patch management, which was the subject of a prior office hours. You can watch that again if you like. That would be on our YouTube channel. Um, that's crucial because it helps to prevent your computer from having vulnerabilities that are known. And once they're known, the early, week or two after those vulnerabilities are known, they're highly sought after by threat actors for compromise. So patch management is extremely, extremely important. We can put browser protections in place so that way it monitors or modifies rather what the user's allowed to do on their browser. And then, of course, we can do device health audits to make sure that we're not seeing signs of threat actors manipulating things on the back end. Because one of the things that is very true is that threat actors try to mimic user behavior and they do shadow IT. They try to mimic what legitimate IT professionals do. So that way they can avoid triggering managed detection and response, antivirus protections, things like that. But with having device audits, we can look for some of those telltale signs that a threat actor's been on the system, and then we can act accordingly. Another thing beyond MFA is phishing resistance. Phishing is still the number one way that threat actors gain access to a computer, typically through email. A phishing email comes in, user is fooled into thinking that they have to click on a link right now in order to get a file from a customer, in order to access a voicemail, you name it. They then click on that link and then they enter their credentials, and now they've given away the farm, so to speak. And so, another thing, so we want to have really good email security filtering in place to protect against that. We'd also we should consider phishing resistant MFA, which would be hardware keys and pass keys, something we've talked about in prior office hours for sure. We can talk about it again if you have questions. Just put that in the Q&A. Another thing we can do, this is becoming increasingly important, is domain monitoring. And that's to make sure that your domain name hasn't been modified by a threat actor in any way to allow them to email on your behalf to gain access to your customers or your vendors, and vice versa to gain access to you. Now, we can also implement identity threat detection and response, ITDR, which monitors and analyzes a SaaS product such as Microsoft 365. But it also works for Google Workspace. It works for a lot of different SaaS products. We can monitor that for anomalous behavior, behavior that looks threat actory, or certain other behaviors such as impossible travel. That's where somebody logs into their account both from their home base in Philadelphia and then also from, say, Singapore. That's generally not going to be possible for somebody to be in both of those places simultaneously. So if they see something like that, they could lock the account down immediately. They can also monitor for unusual data access. Are they doing anything unusual? Or for off hours activity, such as when they're typically asleep, certain things like that. Another thing we can do is we can do blast radius reduction. I know this is a lot, but there's a lot here to protect a company against MFA threats. And so that's where we give users only access to what they need. That's where we segment what users can access, and we segment the network. That's where we have a good backup and a recovery plan in place, and crucially, where we have a good incident response readiness plan. So the key takeaway here is this: MFA is required. MFA is not sufficient any longer. What is required and sufficient now, or at least the best that we can do right now, is modern security. And that's protecting the identity, protecting the device, monitoring the behavior, and then managing our response and having a really mature, good overall cybersecurity threat um, profile and looking at how we approach cybersecurity. This is how at Ironside, this is how we approach it. There's 21 fundamental blocks of cybersecurity, and we use this as a template in our consultation with you for because every company is very different, and every company, some of those things don't matter a lot, and some things matter more than they do for others. So I'm going to turn that over to you. Any questions that anybody's asked, Paris?
Yes, we have gotten a couple. So the first one is, which types of MFA are the safest and which should we avoid?
I would, if at all possible, if we see SMS and you can get off of it, get off of it. It's antiquated, it's old, it's going away anyway. And it's much, much better to use six digit or better yet, something like Duo is really, really fantastic. It is a third party tool though. But something like Duo is really fantastic. That's kind of like the cream of the crop right now. The other thing too would be hardware keys. That there is definitely it's a different method of authenticating, but hardware keys is a great MFA method that's extremely, extremely safe.
Awesome. How would we know if someone bypassed MFA successfully?
You won't. No, the only way to know is with behavior monitoring, or some of those other things that we talked about. There's no way to know. Not in an automated way. I mean, you could know by doing an investigation though and looking at it. So if there's no conditional access in place, no conditional access policies rather in place, and you just happen to check a user and you see that they're logged into Singapore and Philadelphia at the same time, that's a huge giveaway right there. But unless you have eyes monitoring all of your employees everywhere, you're not going to know that that's happening. So the only way to protect against that is by having conditional access policies or monitoring, which is ITDR, the Identity Threat Detection and Response, to look for those types of things.
Okay, the next one is, what is the most common way you see businesses with MFA still get breached?
Phishing by far. Because where they are, phishing is the number one way for a threat actor to gain access to an account or a system. However, um, really, really close behind that is them gaining access to the system because then rather than just getting access to the account directly, if they gain access to the system, they can gain access to that account that they desire, as well as other accounts, and they can put in backdoors so that way when they're found out, then they can try to gain access back into the system or that account again. So we're actually seeing a really rapid uptick in the last few months of endpoints being compromised, which has always been an issue, but it's become a significantly greater issue. Looking at those endpoints being compromised, so that way a threat actor has the ability to gain access to multiple systems, and if they can, gain access back into the system after they're discovered. We're seeing that all the time.
Wow. Okay. If an attacker logs in with valid credentials and MFA, why don't security tools stop them automatically?
They can if there are conditional access policies set up or if there's behavior monitoring. However, if somebody, let's take that user that logs in from Philadelphia, they live in Philadelphia, they always log in from Philadelphia, and the threat actor knows that. And so they already have another system compromised in Philadelphia, and they use that system to log into your user's um, Microsoft 365 account, SaaS account, whatever it is, from Philadelphia. That's not going to trigger anything. It's just not. It's not going to trigger it whatsoever, even if you have good conditional access policy. So that's why it's so critical to have a multi-layered approach to security and having an entire fundamentally um, se- uh, an entire cybersecurity mentality that's ubiquitous across the board, across all employees, the entire organization. That should be part of the fabric of the organization's culture is that we all work together to protect the company and to protect ourselves from these threat actors.
Okay, the next question is, what is the minimum we should be doing beyond MFA if we're a small or mid-sized business?
The absolute minimum would be monitoring for anomalous behavior and conditional access policies. And so, monitoring for anomalous behavior is that managed detection and response or extended protection and response, and identity threat detection and response. That's the absolute minimum. If you're not doing that, then you're behind the curve. Actually, if you are doing that, you still might be behind the curve because there's still a lot of other minimums. A backup plan where you can restore your data and your settings is absolutely crucial. It's fundamental. Frankly, that's always been fundamental. Um, and having a really good handle, which you should always have is a really good handle on what your industry's best practices are, because if you deviate from those best practices, then we've got the potential for legal negligence for not following some of those things. And that's something, stay tuned for that. We're going to talk about that in another office hours, or you can reach out and ask more questions about that. But that's a lot of times where if we're looking at the bare minimum, I don't even like talking about the bare minimum too much because I don't want anybody to take away, have their takeaway be, oh, I'll just do that and then I'm good until I hear otherwise. It bare minimum is like what we should have been doing 2 years ago in that way. Really, what we have to do is we have to look at this from what is the thing that's going to damage the company or the organization because of these security vulnerabilities. And the best way to look at that is what are the best practices that are required of you in your industry by your cybersecurity liability insurance company, by any regulatory agencies, because that's what's going to determine your legal liability for having or not having done those things.
Okay, I think this one is a follow-up to the question about the most common way you see businesses still get breached. It
Mhm.
is, does this mean phishing training doesn't really work?
Um, so phishing, so training needs to always update and it needs to train. Okay, so phishing training, let me back up a little bit. It's like going to the gym. You got to do it. You've got to stay on top of your health, your nutrition. You've got to do that. Otherwise, you start to pay a penalty over time. And so cybersecurity awareness training is absolutely critical rather, for that type of thing. So it needs to be done with discipline on a consistent basis and with a partner that updates the training based on new um, threats that are out there. So it is effective. The other thing I'll say about it's effective as long as you're doing it well. The other thing I'll say about it too is that it is an absolute requirement to protect yourself from any kind of liability, whether it's from the government, whether it's from your cybersecurity liability insurance policy getting a claim filled, or from from an attorney, from one of your customers or your vendors potentially suing you because you didn't do something like that. So it's a huge way to protect the company. So it's to me, cybersecurity awareness training is it is absolutely essential to the survival of the organization, and it's so easy to do. Like it doesn't take much. It's very easy to do.
Oh, we got another one come through. Mike asked, if we were to set conditional access based on location, would that be by a specific public IP address or are there other ways?
So you can do it by IP address. It's a great thing about conditional access policies is you've got a lot of different areas that you can go, and you can kind of go a little bit crazy with it. I you you can do it by IP address if you like, such as making sure that only access from a branch office is accessible. Outside of that, we're dealing with Microsoft 365 that might be less practical. What's more practical is doing geo, so like location based um, access policies, because each IP address range is only for a specific geography, a specific region. So you can restrict it down to the region. Like I said, the greater Philadelphia area is pretty common. You can go tighter than that too in some cases, but But typically, you kind of do that region in order to protect yourself from somebody logging in from Singapore, or Germany's got a massive hacking network out over there that frequently attacks businesses in the United States. It's some of the stuff's pretty rampant. So if you have conditional access policy that restricts it down to this particular region, then you're safe from someone logging in outside of that region.
All right. Yep. Geo. Like I said, Geo got it. Thanks. One more question that we have. How much of this protection depends on your IT provider versus our employees' behavior?
It's both. But you it's okay, it's both because the employees are the ones doing the stuff. But here's the thing, the employees, what's their area of expertise? You know what I mean? Like they're accountants or they're lawyers or they're paralegals or they're engineers or architects, right? Or they're secretaries or receptionists or nurses or that's what they do. And their first thought isn't cybersecurity. It should be. We need to definitely, that should be part of the fabric of the company. But in general, their first thought is doing their job. And in a lot of ways, cybersecurity, kind of gets in the way of that. And so a constant cultural awareness of the importance of cybersecurity is essential. And one of the easiest ways to do that is, excuse me, cybersecurity awareness training. Also, one of the best ways to do that is by having managers and ownership invested in this and talking about it. So employees are crucial, but a lot of that gets driven by the IT service provider because we're the ones that make sure that updates are pushed out to cybersecurity awareness training, for example. We're the ones that do things like this right here and do education on these office hours, or that on quarterly business reviews we talk about the latest protections that we can implement, or here's something unique about your business that you need protection against, things like that. And so they're both super important and they both have their role.
Okay, I think that was the last question. Thank you, everybody. Our
All
next
right.
session is going to be on February 11th. You can join using the same link that you used today. So feel free to send that Zoom link to anyone in your organization that you think would benefit from these sessions. The recording should be up by end of day today on our YouTube channel. So we appreciate you being here and we'll see you at the next session. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Bye.